About 150 years ago in England, the royal family publicly funded Galton, Darwin, the Huxleys, the Wedgwoods, and others, the top scientific inventors, the top scientific brains in England, pioneering eugenics, anthropology, sociology, the list goes on and on. They went to him and they said, people are rebelling against the empire worldwide. How do we set up a scientific dictatorship where the people love their own servitude? We have all these white papers. We cover them in Endgame. This is mainline history. This is on the record. And they came back and they said, we have to create social departments, Planned Parenthood. We have to create health departments that will carry out racial hygiene. And we will start taking poor people's children. We will start sterilizing them. We can start drugging the water supply to make people passive and to go along with our orders. We can put in puppet governments in the third world that we control, take down the British flag, but have covert operations that work through puppet governments and through roundtable groups. So they set up the royal commissions, who then set up the Royal Institute on International Affairs, who set up the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, and other management groups that actually control the industry, banking, media, academia. And most of the people in those groups aren't aware of the full scope of the operational system. So you have higher level groups that control that. And they called for, through banking and through fiat currency, going in and buying off third world and first world nations leaders, and to get those countries in debt as long as they paid off the leadership. If the countries wouldn't go along with it, they would finance revolutions within or finance their neighbors to attack them. This is all declassified. The Milner papers from Lord Milner in 1914, the list goes on and on. They said, we will institute World War I and World War II. This is over 100 years ago, as a pretext to make the public say, we don't want any more war. We want a global private corporate government through the League of Nations and the United Nations to end all war. But in truth, they actually hand out the weapon systems and the technological systems so that actually more wars get started. And that, of course, has come out in the public record. By the 60s, they came up with the environmental plan to carry out eugenics and to tell the public the world was overpopulated and that resources had to be cut off to the planet to save the planet. And Maurice Strong at the UN, David Rockefeller and others wrote books and gave statements and gave speeches at the UN, and the UN wrote up battle plans to forcibly reduce world population by cutting off the resources and going in and paying off the government's leaders to engage in forced sterilization. 500,000 plus women were sterilized. 34 states passed laws for forced sterilization. That really happened environmentally by the turn of the last century, but they relaunched it in the 60s. Hitler embarrassed them by having a brand of eugenics that was a little fast-moving for them and also only targeted certain groups. So they then began to call themselves environmentalists, transhumanist. The Eugenics Quarterly changed its name to an environmental study group. They became crypto-eugenicists. And they have stated that they would fearmonger the planet in the name of an ice age, the name of global heating, global warming, acid rain, to accept this. And that once the private central banks had gotten the nations in enough debt, they would bankrupt them by design, use global deals with China, who was their partner in 1975 via treaty that George Bush Sr. got them to sign when he was ambassador to China, to have a one-child policy where the babies are taken or in many cases killed. That's on record. Forced abortions are performed. And China was told all major industrial facilities will be moved to China. We will set up cartels and monopolies where all other industry is bankrupted. A select group of banks financing this will own the sub-corporations, and the Chinese government will then be set up as the new world superpower by 2010. We're now 2010 in just a few weeks, and they've announced they are the new superpower. They are the controlling arm. China would then own the majority of British, European, and U.S. debt and would be able to order things through the UN. That's now been announced yesterday. The economy would be completely bankrupted in phases. If you are too poor, CPS will visit your home and will take your children. School will be year-round. That's all in government textbooks like Eco Science, written by Paul Ehrlich, chief advisor to George Bush Sr., and to Barack Obama, John P. Holdren, current White House science czar. They will then set up a global carbon tax with a ID card issued nationally but globally standardized under a treaty signed with the UN in 2000, where everything you eat, everywhere you go, everything you do will be tracked. License plate reading cameras already going on in England, Europe, and the U.S. will tax you by the mile, track everywhere you go. When your carbon credits run out, you're already taxed. The taxes will go way up to as much as $10 per mile driven. There will be taxes on all beef, all chicken, all fish. That will be added by a global regulatory body run by the IMF and World Bank. That is now in the Danish text of the Copenhagen Global Government Treaty. Herman van Rompuy, the new head of the EU, openly states this. Al Gore openly states this. It's all happening. Everything will systematically and incrementally, so you can't stand up against it as easily. If it happens overnight, you'd stand up. Be implemented. Year-round school. You'll have to stay at school till 8, 9 at night. Everyone will get monthly CPS, health department, eugenics visits to your home. This is so unbelievably horrible, ladies and gentlemen, that I shake when I talk about it. I literally woke up at 4 a.m. again this morning, completely freaked out over this because it's all been announced. It's one thing to read State Department Memorandum 200, where Henry Kissinger stated this in 73. It's one thing to read the United Nations Biological Diversity Assessment 96, calling for exterminating 80% of the population. It's one thing to know all this was coming. It's another thing to now see it happening. I want to play Herman van Rompuy, the new head of the EU, saying global governance, the first year of global governance is 2009. Here it is.
2009 is also the first year of global governance, with the establishment of the G20 in the middle of the financial crisis. The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet.
Okay. The global management of our planet through global government, global governance. Here is Al Gore saying the same thing. Here it is.
It is the awareness itself that will drive the change. And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance and global agreements. But the many business leaders who have been present here.
That's right. And that's the next key. The Fortune 100, Dutch Royal Shell, ExxonMobil, it's now come out in the Climate Gain emails, are running it all. While saying, oh, you're with the oil companies are owned by the big banks and insurance companies. They own this. Now, in Fall of the Republic, that's been out for almost 2 months, before ClimateGate, we have their statements and their documents where the IMF and World Bank will run the planetary government and you will pay your carbon taxes to them. The treaty was meant to be secret. The new global government treaty was meant to be secret until next week during the 2-week Copenhagen Global Government Conference. But it was leaked 3 days ago to the London Guardian. The UN confirms it is the treaty. It says the UN is only a front. The IMF and World Bank will now set up planetary government through the G20. There will be a global authority over all travel, 2% flat tax over every nation paid to the IMF and World Bank, 30% tax on all fossil fuels, natural gas, taxes on all meat, television sets, light bulbs, water. There are over 150 taxes, 700 new bureaucracies. Obama has said, this was in AP 2 days ago, headline, Obama threatens command and control. And he says even if Congress, the Senate won't ratify this, he's going to sign it. He can't sign it and do it if they won't ratify it. But he says, I am a dictator. I'm going to do this. And he's illegally getting $500,000 cash payment from the Nobel Laureate Committee and being given this warmongering peace prize. So we're going into global government, and our Senate's being told, we don't care if you're not going to ratify the treaty. We're going to do it through the bureaucracy and list carbon dioxide as a toxic waste that humans